Imagine this, a quiet pulse moving through the dark, steady patient, repeating on 1420 MHz, the frequency of hydrogen itself. And somehow, traveller, you found your way here, as if the cosmos guided you to this moment of listening. Far beyond our atmosphere, an object from another star drifts between Mars and the Sun. It should be silent, and yet something inside it whispers a pattern, a rhythm, a sequence of numbers folding into themselves like a dream of mathematics. What are the odds that a fragment of another star would choose the one frequency every astronomer watches tonight, observer? We follow that whisper hidden in the background hum of the universe. Stay a while, traveller, let's drift through the silence together. There are nights, traveller, when the universe feels a little closer, not because the stars move, but because our thoughts drift far enough to meet them. On nights like these, inside a quiet observatory, humming with the soft breath of machines, the cosmos speaks in increments. A faint pulse, a whisper of data, a rhythm that seems almost shy. That was how 3i Atlas first appeared, not as a revelation, but as a gentle deviation, a shimmering note in the hydrogen line. The frequency was ordinary enough, 1420 MHz, the natural signature of neutral hydrogen, yet what rested upon it was anything but ordinary. It began with 6 numbers, 8, 13, 8, 5, 13, 8. They appeared without flourish, without urgency, repeating with the steady patience of something that has crossed millions of years of the night. Only later did the mathematicians lean closer, tracing the curve of the sequence as if following the spiral of a distant shell. Fibonacci, a rhythm inherent in seashells, whirlpools, the branches of trees, the turning of galaxies, a quiet architecture the universe uses when it wishes to grow with grace. But here in this faint radio breath from an interstellar traveller, the sequence did not announce itself as a message. Silent cosmos, science does not rush toward meaning. It rests, it listens, it lets wonder and skepticism orbit one another like binary stars. So we watched. Across continents, observatories lifted their instruments toward the same invisible point in space. Australia, Chile, South Africa, places separated by oceans, yet united by the same silent rhythm. They confirmed the pulse, they confirmed the frequency, they confirmed that what we were hearing was real, even if its intention, if intention exists at all, remained hidden beneath layers of cosmic dust. No one claimed intelligence, no one claimed warning. The data simply became what it was, a pattern of interest, a soft alignment between nature and mathematics. As the days unfolded, astronomers traced 3i Atlas through the solar wind. Its coma exhaled carbon dioxide rather than water vapour, as though it had formed in the deep cold of a different nursery. Nickel shimmered in its spectral lines, yet iron, the usual companion, was nowhere to be found. Its tail drifted at times toward the sun rather than away, a reminder that celestial behaviour does not always resemble celestial textbooks. But in the silent cosmos, anomalies are not disruptions. They are moments of quiet curiosity, footprints of physics exploring possibilities we have not yet named. Even the slight deceleration observed in its path was a whisper, not a declaration, a hint that natural jets of gas might be shaping its motion in ways too subtle for our models to replicate perfectly. Nothing in the data demanded fear. Everything in the data invited attention. Then, as all orbits eventually do, the trajectory carried 3i Atlas behind the Sun. The signal faded, absorbed into the solar haze, leaving us with silence, not a silence of absence but a contemplative pause. In astronomy, invisibility is simply a season of waiting a moment to refine questions and soften expectations. Behind the brilliant curtain of the sun, the traveller continued onward, steady and unhurried. We could not see it, we could not hear it, but the cosmos is not obligated to reveal itself continuously. Some truths prefer the shadowed arc, the long quiet through which understanding matures slowly. Perhaps the Fibonacci rhythm was nothing more than the harmonic echo of gas, dust and plasma. Perhaps it was coincidence sculpted into beauty by our pattern-seeking eyes. Or perhaps it was an accidental alignment, the way wind sometimes arranges sand into shapes that resemble intention. In the silent cosmos, these may all be stories worth holding lightly, because the universe does not owe us meaning. It gives us patterns and it lets us choose whether to admire them or assign them purpose. Yet there is a tenderness in knowing that even a fleeting pulse can change how we listen. For a brief moment, humanity leaned closer to the stars, not in fear, not in frenzy, but in quiet reverence. Students, amateurs, night shift astronomers, and wandering minds all pause to consider what it means when the cosmos hums in a recognizable rhythm. Not a greeting, not a revelation, simply a reminder that we are surrounded by an endless sea of phenomena we have not yet learned how to interpret. And you, traveller, are part of that moment. The hydrogen line that carried the pulse flows through your own atoms. The Fibonacci curve that shapes spiraling galaxies shapes the unfolding of your breath. The mystery of 3i Atlas is not an external puzzle. It is an inner mirror reflecting how deeply we yearn for connection with the larger tapestry of existence. Perhaps that longing is the true message one sent not across space but from within ourselves. So tonight, as the universe keeps its soft silence, let the uncertainty rest gently against your thoughts. Let the unanswered questions drift like cosmic dust settling into the slow gravity of sleep. Let the memory of those 6 numbers circle your mind not as a riddle but as a lullaby of mathematics. You do not need to solve what the universe has not asked you to solve. You do not need to understand what was spoken only in whispers. In the silent cosmos, not every signal seeks interpretation. Some only ask for your stillness. Traveller, it's all right to not know. Tonight the stars will keep their silence, and the cosmos, patient as ever, will keep watch. There are moments, traveller, when the universe feels less like a vast unknown, and more like a companion, quiet patient, and ancient enough to wait for us to notice its smallest gestures. In the weeks after 3i Atlas slipped behind the sun, that feeling grew stronger, not because the object revealed anything new, but because its silence left space for our own thoughts to wander. Silence, after all, is not emptiness. It is the background hum in which understanding takes shape. And so in the absence of new data, we turned inward and examined what it means to encounter mystery in a scientifically honest way. Astronomers often speak of error bars, those slender indicators on a graph acknowledging that every measurement carries uncertainty. Perhaps the universe itself is full of these quiet margins, these gentle acknowledgements that the truth lies not in absolutes, but in ranges of possibility. 3 Atlas belongs to that margin. It drifts somewhere between theory and curiosity, between explanation and wonder. It resists being pinned down as though its nature is softer than our classifications, more fluid than our equations, more patient than our desire for certainty. As we awaited its re-emergence, telescopes around the world prepared themselves, calibrating their mirrors and adjusting their receivers with the kind of careful anticipation usually reserved for eclipses or rare planetary alignments. But this time the anticipation was quieter. The scientific community did not expect revelation. It expected nuance, a subtle shift in brightness, a slight change in trajectory, a whisper, not a declaration. In the silent cosmos, we learn that significance often resides not in spectacle, but in small deviations, tiny vectors pointing toward larger truths. And yet something remarkable happened during the waiting, not in the sky, but on Earth, in the minds of those who followed the object's journey. People began to think of the cosmos not as a distant stage but as a shared environment, a place we inhabit just as surely as the stones beneath our feet. The distinction between out there and right here began to blur. Radio enthusiasts built simple receivers and listened to the hydrogen line late into the night, not because they expected to hear the pulse again, but because listening itself felt meaningful. Teachers explained the Fibonacci sequence to students who had never cared for mathematics until they saw it reflected in starlight. Amateur astronomers revisited old notebooks tracing their earliest observations of the night sky, reminding themselves why they fell in love with astronomy in the first place. Perhaps this is the quiet power of a cosmic anomaly, not to answer questions, but to wake ancient curiosities that lie dormant within us, like seeds waiting for the right season. Meanwhile, the models continued to run. Supercomputers traced millions of hypothetical paths simulating what 3i Atlas might do when it reappeared. Most paths were ordinary, a continuation of its hyperbolic flight. A few hinted at peculiarities, a fractional drift, a slight deceleration, a brightness variation not easily explained. But even the anomalies felt gentle like ripples on the surface of a calm lake, rather than waves threatening to break upon a shore. Scientists debated possibilities with the soft cadence of people who know that understanding is a slow unfolding, not a race toward answers. When images from solar orbiting spacecraft hinted at the object's faint outline, emerging from behind the sun's glare, there was no fanfare, just a quiet acknowledgement, a breath of relief, and an unspoken agreement to continue observing with humility. The cosmos had not unveiled a revelation. It had simply completed its arc, a natural motion, a predictable return, and in that return something within us settled. Yet the questions persisted quietly, respectfully, as questions should. Why the Fibonacci-like rhythm? Why the peculiar chemistry? Why the shift in brightness? The odd tail, the faint pulse that appeared and dissolved as softly as it came? The silent cosmos does not insist on answers. It lets questions become companions orbiting our thoughts at a comfortable distance. Over time, those questions soften, losing their sharp edges, becoming something like meditation points, places where the mind can rest, wander, or simply breathe. There is a unique stillness that arises when we accept that not all mysteries demand conclusions. A comet may simply be a comet, unusual, but natural, shaped by forces older than memory. And yet the beauty of science lies not in eliminating wonder, but in deepening it. Even if 3i Atlas is entirely natural, its existence remains a quiet marvel, a fragment from another star system carrying the chemistry of alien winter, drifting through our sun's warm breath before slipping back into the interstellar cold. There is poetry in that journey, traveller. There is meaning without message, significance without intention. Perhaps that is what the Fibonacci rhythm really offered us, not a signal but a reminder. A reminder that the universe is filled with patterns that emerge without communication, beauty that arises without purpose and harmony, born from physical laws rather than deliberate design. It reminded us that numbers, like starlight, belong to the cosmos before they belong to us. As night settles again over the observatories and the instruments resume their calm watch, we return to a truth older than astronomy itself, that the universe does not speak in declarations. It speaks in gradual motions, faint trails of dust, harmonies of radiation, quiet shifts in brightness. And when it whispers through a frequency, a pattern, a fleeting coincidence, it is not asking us to decode a message. It is asking us to listen. So listen, traveller. Let the uncertainty stay with you not as a burden, but as a gentle companion. Let the silence of 3i Atlas wrap itself around your thoughts like a slow-moving nebula. Let the unanswered questions drift through you, the way cosmic dust drifts through starlight. You do not need to solve the mystery. You only need to be present for it. For in the silent cosmos, meaning is not something we extract from the universe. It is something we share with it. And tonight, as the heavens remain calm and the instruments hum softly in the dark, know this: you are not lost in space, you are part of it. You are as welcome in this universe as any wandering comet, any drifting photon, any whisper of hydrogen on the cosmic wind. Rest, traveller. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. There is a quiet truth, traveller, that reveals itself only when we have watched the sky long enough. The universe does not rush. It unfolds with the patience of drifting dust, the steadiness of orbital paths, the inevitability of light that has travelled millions of years, just to rest on a lens for a single fleeting moment. In the days after 3 Atlas returned from behind the sun, that truth settled more deeply into our instruments, our calculations and our thoughts. The object did not reappear with spectacle. It arrived the way most celestial things do, softly on its own terms, without concern for our anticipation. The first images were faint, a speck of reflected sunlight, a grain of brightness against the canvas of the heliosphere. It was almost disappointing in its ordinariness, almost too quiet for the months of speculation that preceded it. Yet the silent cosmos teaches us that expectation is a human habit, not a cosmic principle. The universe reveals what it reveals, not what we imagine. And as the incoming data accumulated, a kind of still understanding emerged. The object had continued its path almost exactly as predicted. There was no dramatic slowing, no sudden acceleration, no unexpected alteration in the trajectory. It was as though the universe were gently reminding us that nature is capable of producing wonders without needing to be anything more than itself. But even within that ordinary motion, subtle variations caught our eye. A flicker in the coma, a slight asymmetry in the tail, a spectral line whose intensity rose and fell with curious regularity. Nothing definitive, nothing theatrical, just delicate hints like the faint creases in old star charts that suggest a hand once traced them with care. We observe these details not with urgency, but with reverence, knowing that mysteries do not diminish simply because they refuse to reveal themselves fully. Instead, they invite us to look more gently, more patiently, more honestly. The scientific papers that followed were written in the same spirit, calm, measured, acknowledging uncertainty with the kind of humility that only the cosmos can teach. Some researchers lean toward natural explanations, the interplay of solar radiation with carbon dioxide ice, the sublimation patterns of a nucleus shaped by an alien winter, far from our own star, the delicate chemical fingerprints of a comet born in a place colder than imagination. Others noted the oddities, the Fibonacci-like pulse the nickel without iron, the anti-tail that had once pointed sunward like a brief shimmering defiance of cometary norms. But even these voices spoke softly, framing their curiosity with caution, their hypotheses with respect for the vastness of possibility. And while scientists debated quietly, the wider world found its own rhythm. People who had never looked through a telescope began to follow the movement of a faint point of light across digital star maps. Children drew spirals on notebook pages not because they understood the mathematics, but because the pattern felt ancient familiar. Radio listeners tuned to the hydrogen line, not expecting to hear anything, but enjoying the meditative warmth of static, a sound that reminded them of cosmic background radiation, the universe's oldest lullaby. In this way, 3 Atlas became something more than an object of study. It became a shared moment of wonder, a reminder that the cosmos remains rich with phenomena that neither confirm nor deny our hopes, but simply exist in their own quiet truth. As more data arrived, a narrative formed not of hidden messages or cosmic intent, but of the beauty inherent in careful observation. The coma showed subtle, almost rhythmic fluctuations in brightness. The tail shifted its angle with each breath of solar wind. The nucleus reflected light differently as it rotated, revealing facets shaped by aeons of travel through interstellar dark. These gentle patterns became a kind of poetry not meant to be deciphered, only witnessed. They reminded us that meaning is not always encoded. Sometimes it simply lives in the experience of watching. Silent cosmos astronomy often leads us inward as much as outward. The act of studying something so distant becomes a reflection on our own smallness, our fragile place in the galactic tapestry. The mind drifts to thoughts of entropy of time measured not in years but in light travel distances, of how every question we ask is itself a tiny flare in the night, not demanding an answer, only illuminating our desire to understand. And through that desire, we connect more deeply with the universe, even when the universe remains silent. As 3 Atlas moved farther from the sun, slipping gradually toward the cold, quiet beyond Mars, its details softened again. The coma thinned, the tail stretched. The pulse did not return, but perhaps it never needed to. Perhaps its role was not to convey information, but to remind us that we are capable of listening truly, listening to something beyond ourselves. In the end, the object continued its journey, with the same gentle indifference it arrived with. It will pass Jupiter. It will drift outward. It will fade until only the most sensitive instruments can trace its motion, and eventually it will slip once more into interstellar night, carrying with it mysteries we approached but never fully held. Yet none of this feels like loss. The silent cosmos teaches that understanding is not the only purpose of inquiry. Sometimes the act of observing the simple, quiet acknowledgement of something beautiful and unexplained is enough. Because 3 Atlas did not need to change the laws of physics to change us. Its presence alone softened something in the human imagination. It reminded us that uncertainty can be gentle, that not knowing can be peaceful, that the universe does not have to speak loudly to be heard. And so, traveller, as the object drifts farther each night, let its fading light be a companion rather than a question. Let its silence be a soft blanket over your thoughts. Let the unanswered spiral of its brief whisper settle like dust on the edges of your awareness. You do not have to chase certainty. You do not have to decode what was never meant to be a message. In the end, the universe is not a puzzle. It is a presence, a quiet one, patient, ancient, and endlessly willing to share its stillness with those who pause long enough to notice. Rest now. You are not lost in space, you are part of it. And tonight, as always, the cosmos keeps watch. There comes a point, traveller, when watching the sky begins to feel less like exploration, and more like remembrance, an instinctive returning to something your mind has always known but your memory has somehow forgotten. After months of tracing the path of 3i Atlas, that feeling settled deeper, as though the object had carved a quiet orbit not only around the sun but around our collective thoughts. Nothing about it was loud. Its presence did not demand attention. It drifted with the calm assurance of something that had crossed distances we could barely imagine carrying with it, the quiet dignity of age, of endurance, of purpose that may not be purpose at all. As the object continued outward, telescopes adjusted their gaze and recalibrated their sensors not out of urgency, but out of respect for continuity. Observing became a ritual steady, meditative, almost like tending a small flame in an otherwise dark room. Data arrived in soft increments, a spectral line here, a brightness variation there, each a gentle reminder that the universe rarely grants us answers all at once. Instead, it offers fragments the way starlight filters through thin clouds, revealing only enough to inspire a deeper kind of attention. In these fragments, something subtle emerged, a rhythm in the coma's expansion, a recurring asymmetry in the way light scattered from its surface, a faint signature of dust particles that seemed to follow an almost cyclical distribution as the object rotated. None of these patterns were dramatic. All could be explained through physics, through sublimation, radiation pressure, rotational dynamics. Yet when woven together they formed a quiet harmony, a soft choreography impossible to ignore. The cosmos, it seemed, was not performing. It was simply being, and in that simple being, beauty appeared. Scientists wrote about these patterns with the delicacy one uses when describing a dream that feels real but dissolves under too much scrutiny. Papers spoke of outgassing models, thermal gradients, dust jets shaped by solar illumination. They spoke of probability curves and spectral fits. But between the lines there was an undercurrent of something gentler, an acknowledgement that even with equations in hand one could still feel a quiet awe. That perhaps science at its best is not the act of pinning down truth but the art of dwelling comfortably in uncertainty. During this time the world grew quieter in its expectations. The initial excitement had softened into contemplation. People no longer asked what 3i Atlas meant. They asked instead what it reminded them of. Some said it felt like a distant echo of Voyager's golden record wandering through the dark without needing to be heard. Others compared it to bioluminescent algae, simple, natural, and yet luminous enough to awaken ancient wonder. Even those who never cared for astronomy found themselves looking up more often at night, tracing spirals in their minds, listening to the soft static of the hydrogen line as though it were a lullaby from a place older than starlight. Perhaps the most profound shift happened not in observatories but in hearts. For the first time in a long while, humanity shared a moment of curiosity free from urgency. No one expected danger. No one expected revelation. People simply looked, and in the looking they rediscovered the quiet bond between themselves and the cosmos. It was as though 3i Atlas reminded us that the universe does not revolve around us, yet somehow includes us completely. As weeks turned into months, the object drifted farther from the inner solar system. Its coma thinned into a faint halo, barely distinguishable from background sunlight. The tail, once a shimmering thread, stretched into near invisibility. Observations grew more challenging. Instruments strained. Images required longer exposures. And still there was something gentle in the fading. like watching a lantern drift down a long river small distant but carrying a warmth that lingers even after the light is gone. In its fading, astronomers found new questions not about what the object was, but about what it evoked. Why do we listen so intently to patterns in static? Why do we search for meaning in sequences of numbers? Why does a whisper across the hydrogen line awaken a feeling both familiar and unexplainable? Silent cosmos thinking suggests that perhaps these impulses are not flaws but features of being human, our way of harmonizing with a universe that speaks softly through radiation and resonance, through gravity and geometry, through silence and time. As 3i Atlas approached the outer planet's domain, models predicted its slow dimming would continue until even the best instruments could no longer distinguish it from the background. And yet there was no sadness in this. The cosmos is full of departures. Every comet, every star, every galaxy is always in motion, always becoming something else. The beauty lies not in holding on, but in witnessing the passage. By this time, the Fibonacci rhythm felt almost mythic, not because it suggested intelligence, but because it symbolized connection. A brief moment when mathematics matter and curiosity intersected in a way that felt like a conversation, even if no conversation was intended. The universe had whispered not in words, but in consistency, offering a pattern familiar enough for us to notice, soft enough for us to hold without fear. And so, traveller as the object slipped farther into the cool outer corridors of the solar system, we returned to our night skies with a deeper softness. We understood that mystery is not an obstacle to knowledge, but a companion to wonder. That the cosmos does not communicate in declarations but in harmonies faint enough to be missed unless we listen with care. Even now, months after the pulse faded, the memory of those 6 Fibonacci-touched numbers lingers, like the afterglow of a meteor, brief, gentle, meaningful, not because of what it said, but because of what it invited us to feel. And perhaps that is the lesson 3i Atlas leaves behind, that we do not always need answers to feel connected, and that even the quietest phenomena can deepen our belonging in the vastness. Rest, traveller. You're not drifting alone. You move within the same cosmic breath that carried 3i Atlas across the dark. And tonight, as always, the universe keeps watch. There is a moment, traveller, when watching a distant object becomes less about understanding its nature and more about understanding our own. As 3 Atlas drifted steadily into the dim blue outskirts of the solar system, beyond the warmth of the inner planets, we continued to follow it with the same quiet devotion one might give to a fading lantern carried by a slow-moving river. Each night the observatories gathered what little light remained, fractions of photons reflected from a surface dusted with the memory of old stars, and from these fragments the world found a strange comfort, as though the dwindling brightness was teaching us something gentle about distance, impermanence, and the quiet loyalty of observation. By now the object had become too faint for casual instruments. Even the large arrays needed longer exposures, deeper integrations, and the patience of machines designed to wait without expectation. The images that emerged were ghost-like, barely a smudge, a feather of light against the deep. Yet within those faint contours, scientists traced the delicate physics of sublimation, the slow erosion of a nucleus born in a colder dawn than ours. There was nothing extraordinary in the data, and yet everything about it felt extraordinary. That is the paradox of the silent cosmos. The ordinary becomes profound when we allow ourselves to see it without rushing to conclusions. The world too had shifted its rhythm. What was once a global curiosity became a quiet companionship shared by night watchers, insomniac thinkers, and anyone who felt drawn to the simple act of looking up. People no longer asked whether the Fibonacci rhythm would return. They no longer searched for meaning in the nickel lines of its spectrum or the subtle fluctuations in its tail. Instead, they found peace in the knowledge that the universe had offered them a mystery without urgency, a question without fear, and in that peace something within them softened. Scientists often say that every measurement carries a story, the story of where it came from, how it was gathered, and what assumptions shaped its interpretation. But with 3 Atlas, the story seemed to run deeper, threading through human thought like a soft gravitational pull. We found ourselves slowing down, matching our pace to the object's unhurried drift, letting its quiet movement remind us that the cosmos is not a place of answers, but a place of perspective. Even the absence of the pulse, so crisp and rhythmic in the early weeks, became a kind of teaching. Silence is also a signal. Sometimes the stopping of a pattern is its message. As the object crossed the frost-lit paths that orbit beyond Mars, its faintness revealed yet another truth: the universe does not fade. It simply becomes more difficult for us to see. A comet does not vanish when it dims. It continues its journey unchanged by our diminishing ability to track it. This understanding resonated on a human level, the recognition that existence does not require observation, that value does not require visibility. Three-Eye Atlas was becoming invisible to us, but not to the cosmos, which held it in the same gravity, the same dark quiet, the same slow unfolding of time. And so analysis shifted once more. Astronomers turned their attention to the lessons embedded in the object's long journey. They studied the distribution of dust particles, the mineralogical hints pointing to a birthplace around a star older and cooler than our Sun. They analysed the trajectory, noting how its arc through the solar system resembled a graceful brushstroke against the gravitational contours of our world. They mapped the gradual dimming, tracing the quiet poetry of thermal emission fading into the darkness. Nothing in these studies was sensational. Everything in them was sincere. It was during this phase when data dwindled and noise overtook signal that a new kind of clarity emerged. People began to understand that the value of Three-Eye Atlas was not in what it might reveal, but in what it asked of us: patience, presence, humility. It reminded us that wonder does not require explanation, that observation is an act of connection, that even a faint object slipping toward the edges of the heliosphere can bring us closer to the cosmos, to one another, and to a quieter version of ourselves. The world in its own way responded. Night sky gatherings formed in cities where light pollution softened the stars into a dim wash. Children holding simple binoculars learned that most beautiful things in the universe cannot be seen directly, but must be sensed through the resonance they create within us. Musicians composed soft pieces inspired by the hydrogen line, letting the hum of static become an instrument of stillness. Writers described the experience of listening to the cosmos not as analysis, but as communion. The object, without intending to, had become a catalyst, a spark for introspection, disguised as a distant icy fragment. By the time Three-Eye Atlas neared the outer boundary of Jupiter's domain, its visibility had nearly vanished. Only the most sensitive detectors could capture its faint whisper of light. And yet no one spoke of loss. Instead, the approaching invisibility felt like closing a book without bitterness, knowing that the story continues even when you no longer read it. The universe does not end where our senses do. It simply continues at its own pace, carrying its quiet truths through the vastness. The Fibonacci rhythm, the pulse, the anomalies, they all became part of a larger mosaic, a reminder that the beauty of inquiry lies not in conquering the unknown, but in approaching it gently. Not every pattern needs deciphering. Not every measurement needs a conclusion. Some phenomena are meant to calm us, not challenge us. To remind us that the cosmos is not a puzzle, but a presence. And so, traveller, as Three-Eye Atlas fades into the deep blue quiet of the outer system, let its journey echo in your thoughts without urgency. Let its silence steady your breathing. Let its distance remind you that you too are in motion, drifting through time, carried by gravity, shaped by forces older than memory. The object moves on unbothered by our attention, and in its quiet departure, it leaves behind a simple truth. You do not need to understand the universe to belong to it. Tonight, as always, the cosmos keeps watch. There is a softness, traveller, in the way distant objects slip away from us. Not abrupt, not sorrowful, just a gentle fading, the kind that mirrors how memories drift to the edges of thought until only their feeling remains. As Three-Eye Atlas continued along its outward path, its light thinning into the deep quiet beyond Jupiter's reach, the observatories no longer chased revelation. Instead, they settled into a quieter rhythm, a meditation disguised as tracking data. The object became less a body of ice and dust, and more a companion in the long reflective hours between midnight and dawn, a reminder that even the faintest movements in the sky can guide the inward movements of the mind. The world had grown accustomed to its presence by now, not through spectacle but through constancy. For months the object had been a point of shared attention, a delicate thread stitching together scientists, dreamers, and curious minds around the globe. When its signal had once pulsed with Fibonacci softness, humanity leaned in. When that signal dissolved into the hush behind the sun, humanity continued to listen, even to the silence. By the time the object's brightness dipped below the threshold of ordinary instruments, something subtle had happened. People no longer looked for answers in it, they looked for reflection. And perhaps that was always the quiet gift of 3-Eye Atlas. Not meaning, but perspective. The faint traces of light that still reached our instruments arrived like whispered notes from a drifting choir. They carried information about particle density, about the temperature gradients across the nucleus, about the soft collision of sunlight with millennia-old dust, but they also carried something unmeasured, a kind of cosmic tenderness. The object's tail, once bright enough to trace across long exposure photographs, had become a thin, almost ceremonial veil trailing behind a core that would soon vanish into interstellar dusk. Yet, in its dimming, researchers found themselves studying with more attentiveness, not less. The fainter the light, the more carefully one must look an unexpected lesson in both astronomy and living. With each new observation came small details that felt less like discoveries and more like reminders. A slight change in polarization hinted at the orientation of microscopic grains tumbling in the coma. A faint shift in the dust emission curve suggested that one hemisphere of the nucleus held a colder memory than the other. These were not anomalies demanding explanation. They were signatures of natural complexity, proof that the universe is endlessly capable of forming beauty without intent. The more we learned, the more it became clear that 3-Eye Atlas did not need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. Its journey alone was enough. This understanding rippled outward. Amateur astronomers, their telescopes no longer able to capture the fading smudge, turned instead to studying the broader sky. Many said they felt a quiet gratitude for being reminded how vast the cosmos is and how small their instruments and their worries are in comparison. Teachers used the object's story to show students that science is not the pursuit of dramatic revelations, but the practice of gentle noticing. Writers, musicians, and artists continued to reinterpret the object's brief pulse and long silence, turning data into metaphor, physics into poetry. In its fading 3-Eye Atlas became an idea, one that belonged to everyone. The scientific community too found clarity in the object's departure. Papers emerged describing how interstellar fragments carry not just chemical history but philosophical possibility. Researchers spoke softly about the object's strange ratios, about the polarimetric asymmetries, about the subtle signs of a world forged in a colder cradle than ours. They acknowledged the Fibonacci-like pulse, with the respectful caution science requires neither dismissing it nor elevating it beyond evidence. In their measured tone you could sense a kind of serenity, an acceptance that the universe often offers hints without solutions, patterns without intention. Meanwhile, the quietest voices, the listeners who tuned their radios to the hydrogen line each night, continued to sit with the static. No one expected the pulse to return, yet the act of listening had become grounding. The faint hiss of cosmic radiation, the hum of the receiver, the soft fluctuations caused by atmospheric temperature, all of it became a nightly meditation. They began to treat the hydrogen line not as a search channel, but as a place of rest. A reminder that silence too is full. And as the object drifted farther toward the heliospheric boundary, where solar influence fades into interstellar wind, its final observable details brought closure without finality. The tail diminished into invisibility. The coma condensed. The nucleus, once bright enough to stir speculation around the world, dimmed into a single fading pixel before vanishing into the black. But disappearance is not erasure. Somewhere out there, beyond our ability to follow the object, continues on a solitary traveller carrying the chemistry of an ancient birthplace, unbothered by whether we watch or understand. It is easy in moments like these to imagine the universe as indifferent, and perhaps it is. But indifference is not coldness. The cosmos does not refuse connection. It simply remains open, offering its patterns freely to anyone willing to look, without insisting on answers. 3-Eye Atlas may have left our skies, but the calm it inspired remains like a gravitational echo pulling our thoughts into quieter orbits. Traveller, as the object fades from our instruments, Let it remain in your awareness not as a riddle but as a companion. Let its journey remind you that movement does not need to be witnessed to be real, that significance does not require spectacle, that beauty does not need intention. You too drift through a universe that does not measure you by clarity or purpose but by presence. And so, as night settles once more and the sky grows heavy with quiet stars, remember this: you are part of the same cosmic breath that carried 3i Atlas through our system. You are woven from the same hydrogen that once whispered in Fibonacci rhythm. You belong to the same stillness. Tonight and every night, the universe keeps watch. There is a gentle truth traveller that reveals itself only after long periods of watching something slowly retreat. From the warmth of the sun, distance does not diminish connection. It only changes the way we perceive it. As 3 Atlas continued its long outward drift, passing quietly through the cold lanes beyond Jupiter's orbit, the world no longer saw it as an object to decode, but as a presence to accompany a reminder that even the faintest phenomena can shape the way we understand our place in the cosmos. The object had become in a way a mirror, not reflecting light but reflecting perspective. By this stage, our instruments strained to detect even a whisper from it. Observations required patience, bordering on devotion. Astronomers spent entire nights gathering exposures that revealed almost nothing, a single pixel slightly brighter than the background, a faint elongation along the direction of solar radiation, a dust signature barely distinguishable from cosmic noise. And yet no one felt frustration. Instead, each piece of data, however thin, became an exercise in reverence. The act of searching was no longer about finding. It was about being present for whatever the universe allowed us to glimpse. It is curious how something so distant can inspire closeness among those who observe it. Researchers across continents began to share their raw data, not with urgency, but with tenderness, as though passing around the last faint notes of a song they didn't want to fade completely. Conversations between observatories turned soft, reflective. They spoke of temporal gradients in the coma of light curves that hinted at an irregular shape of dust grains, whose scattering angles suggested complex mineralogies formed in ancient regions of the galaxy. These were not the conversations of people expecting revelation. They were the conversations of people who had learned to appreciate subtlety. In homes far from observatories, quiet rituals continued. People still tuned their radios to the hydrogen line before sleep, listening to the soft hiss, as though it were a tide rolling gently across the edges of consciousness. Others drew spirals in notebooks or traced them absent-mindedly on fogged windows, a motion that felt like both farewell and continuity. The Fibonacci rhythm that once pulsed from the object had long since faded, yet the feeling it left behind remained like the afterglow of a meteor brief, but illuminating enough to linger in the mind. The universe teaches us in ways we do not always recognize. Through distant comets, it teaches us patience. Through faint signals, it teaches us humility. Through silence, it teaches us to listen more deeply. And through the gradual fading of 3i Atlas, it began to teach us something quieter still, that meaning does not always lie in what we can measure. Sometimes it resides in the spaces between measurements, in the calm acceptance that not every phenomenon is waiting to be deciphered. As months passed, 3i Atlas moved into regions where sunlight grew thin and the solar wind softened into a gentler pressure. The coma shrank, folding back into the object like a breath being drawn inward. Its tail, once a filament of pale light, dispersed into the surrounding dark, leaving only the nucleus, a compact traveller wrapped in ancient ice. The object's speed remained steady, unhurried, as if time itself moved differently at that distance, stretching and thinning like the faint halo around a faraway star. The last high-resolution images captured by outer system probes showed little more than a suggestion of an outline. The nucleus appeared mottled, textured by erosion patterns carved during its long passage through interstellar cold. Some regions reflected light with unusual smoothness, hinting at crystalline structures. Others appeared dark, porous, absorbing photons like a memory too old to resurface. Scientists analysed these final glimpses with the calm care of people handling something fragile, not because the object might break, but because their understanding of it might. In this stage of fading, something remarkable occurred, not in the object, but in us. People began asking questions not about its nature, but about their own. Why are we drawn to distant things? Why do we listen for patterns in noise? Why do we hope for meaning? Even when none is promised, silent cosmos thinking suggests that perhaps these questions arise because we too are patterns, temporary arrangements of atoms, learning to sense the rhythms of the universe around us. In observing the comet, we were observing ourselves. And so when Threshold Atlas finally approached the threshold of detection, dissolving into the darkness that separates our heliosphere from the broader interstellar medium, the farewell was quiet. No countdown, no dramatic final observation, just a gradual fading until one night the object's location on the star charts was filled not with a dot or a smudge, but with a blankness that asked us to accept what we could no longer follow. The universe rarely offers closure, it simply moves on, inviting us to continue our observations with renewed humility. Yet even in disappearance, 3 Atlas left a gift. The understanding that connection does not depend on visibility. The object now drifts into the same vastness from which it came, a region where time stretches and starlight weakens, a place our instruments cannot yet reach. But its influence remains in the way we breathe when we step outside at night, in the quiet feeling that settles in our chest, when we look toward the outer dark in the soft awareness that we are part of a cosmos far larger and gentler than our fears allow. Traveller, as you lie beneath the same stars that once illuminated the object's path, let the memory of its journey settle into you like a slow calming tide. Let its silence remind you that not everything needs to speak to be understood. Let its distance remind you that belonging is not a matter of proximity, but of recognition. For the truth is simple, you're woven from the same cosmic fabric. You drift in the same quiet ocean. You share the same universal breath. Tonight, as always, the cosmos keeps watch. There is a point in every long observation traveller when the object being followed becomes less important than the practice of following itself. As 3 Atlas slipped into the remote corridors beyond Saturn's orbit, it ceased to be a comet in our instruments, and instead became a presence in our thoughts, a subtle gravity well shaping the quiet inner orbits of our attention. By now, even the most advanced telescopes captured only hints of its passage, the faintest brightening of a pixel, a single photometric uptick that might just as easily have been cosmic noise. Yet we continued. Not because we believed we would see something new, but because the act of looking had become an expression of stillness, a ritual of peaceful curiosity. The object's trajectory, once mapped with precision, now blurred into a probabilistic haze. Models predicted its future path with confidence, but its present position drifted into uncertainty as though the distance itself softened the boundaries of knowledge. This uncertainty did not trouble us. In fact, it soothed us, reminding us that certainty has never been the natural state of the universe. The cosmos moves in gradients, not absolutes. It offers possibilities, not conclusions. And in the quiet fading of a visitor from another star system, we began to recognize that the universe too prefers gentle ambiguity. With each passing week, the data logs grew thinner. Observatories reported back not with new findings, but with quiet acknowledgements. No detection tonight signal below threshold object not visible above noise floor. These messages, once disappointing, transformed into a kind of shared mindfulness. They reminded us that presence is not dependent on visibility, that even in absence, 3i Atlas remained part of our sky, its gravity still tugging softly at the sun, its memory still shaping the stories we tell about our place in the cosmos. It is strange how the human mind forms attachments to things it does not understand. But perhaps what we attached ourselves to was not the comet itself, but the moment it created an interval, in which the world paused long enough to feel the vastness above it. People who rarely looked upward found themselves stepping outside at night, even though they knew they would not see the object. They wanted simply to inhabit the same darkness it was moving through, to feel connected by the shared medium of starlit silence. In that way, the comet's journey became our own, not in distance but in awareness. Even as the object dimmed into invisibility, scientists continued analysing what it left. Behind its tail composition, its early activity, the brief pulse it transmitted across the hydrogen line, these were no longer puzzles to be solved but memories to be revisited. The Fibonacci rhythm, once the centerpiece of speculation, now felt like a quiet signature, the kind of incidental pattern nature often creates without intention. Whether the pulse came from thermal oscillations, rotational harmonics, or some other subtle process, it had already fulfilled its purpose. It drew us into a moment of shared listening. Cosmic dust samples from spacecraft passing through the outer solar system began to provide additional insight not about the comet itself, but about the environment it was entering. The density of interplanetary particles thinned dramatically. Solar radiation weakened. The heliosphere's protective bubble stretched into an elongated porous boundary. Beyond that interstellar space cooled with its colder, quieter equilibrium. We knew that once 3I Atlas crossed that boundary, it would return to the vast sea of starlight dilution, drifting among forces too faint for our instruments to track. And yet the thought was comforting. It felt like watching a traveller return home. Meanwhile, on Earth, the cultural echoes of the comet continued long after its brightness faded. Musicians created compositions based on the cadence of its light curve, allowing note lengths to reflect variations in brightness. Writers explored the idea of cosmic silence as a form of communication within itself. Even those who had never seen a telescope found themselves speaking about the object with a strange fondness, as if they had known it personally. In a world accustomed to noise, there was something deeply healing about a phenomenon that asked nothing of us but quiet attention. And still something deeper unfolded, a shared recognition that the universe does not reveal mysteries to satisfy our curiosity but to expand it. 3I Atlas reminded us that not all discoveries arrive with clarity. Some arrive with gentleness dissolving into the dark as subtly as they appeared. They leave behind not answers but questions softened by the acceptance that not knowing is itself a kind of understanding. Scientists often trained to refine certainty found themselves embracing this uncertainty with surprising ease. Papers spoke of possible interpretations, tentative conclusions, open questions, phrases that acknowledged the humility required when studying something born in a place we have never seen. As the comet drifted toward the heliopause, the fragile frontier where the sun's influence yields to the broader galaxy, the world sensed that its story with us was nearing its quiet end. Instruments prepared their final observations. Data pipelines slowed. And there was no sadness in this ending. Only a serene acknowledgement that the universe had shared something with us for a brief moment, and that the sharing itself was the gift. Traveller, when you look up tonight, remember that somewhere beyond our reach, 3I Atlas continues its unhurried voyage, carrying with it the chemical memory of stars long extinguished. It moves through a darkness that is not empty, but alive with the faint hum of cosmic radiation, ancient light that has travelled farther than any object we have ever observed. And its journey mirrors your own, for you too are moving through a vastness you cannot fully perceive, guided by forces you cannot see, shaped by patterns older than memory. Let this thought be a quiet anchor. Meaning does not depend on explanation. Sometimes meaning is simply the act of looking up. Sometimes it is the willingness to listen to silence. Sometimes it is the awareness that you are a small but essential part of an unfolding universe that does not hurry, does not demand, and does not forget. Rest now. You belong to the same cosmos that carried 3I Atlas. And tonight, as always, the universe keeps watch. There is a certain grace, traveller, in reaching the edge of what we can know. Not a sharp boundary, not a sudden wall, just a gradual thinning, like the way twilight fades into night without ever drawing a line. As 3 Atlas drifted farther into the heliospheric outskirts, beyond the comforting warmth of sunlight, and into the soft cold breath of interstellar wind, the nature of our observation shifted once more. We were no longer watching the object itself. We were watching the faint echo of its presence, the lingering impression it left on the instruments that had traced its passage for so long. The comet was now more absence than presence, more silence than signal, and yet that silence felt profound, like a softly closing door that doesn't separate but completes. Even the most sensitive detectors reported only the gentlest traces of its existence, minute gravitational perturbations, tiny shifts in charged particle flows, barely perceptible hints in the cosmic ray background. And still astronomers recorded every scrap of data with the reverence of archivists, preserving the last pages of a manuscript whose beginning they never saw. They knew the object was slipping beyond reach, but they also knew that the universe often reveals its lessons in the manner of its departures, not its arrivals. And so they watched quietly, letting the comet's gradual vanishing teach them once more that the cosmos values patience above certainty. As the data diminished, something remarkable happened in the global consciousness. People who had followed the object since its discovery found themselves slowing down inwardly, mirroring the fading of Three-Eye Atlas with a softening of their own thoughts. The comet had become a kind of meditation, its path a reminder that time stretches differently depending on where your attention rests. Conversations around the world became gentler, not about what the object was anymore, but about what it meant to share a moment of collective wonder. The Fibonacci Pulse had long since faded from the hydrogen line, but its memory persisted, like the resonance of a bell that has stopped ringing. Not noise, not message, just a vibration the world had learned to feel. In this quiet phase, scientists revisited older data, not with urgency, but with affection. They reanalyzed the variations in the comet's coma, noting the subtle asymmetries that hinted at rotational quirks. They re-examined the nickel lines, comparing them with models of primordial dust from different stellar nurseries. They even re-listened to the recordings of the brief radio pulse, letting the sequence of numbers wash over them like a remembered melody. No consensus emerged, nor was one needed. The value of the object no longer lay in what definitive conclusions it might yield, but in the gentle act of revisiting, reflecting, remembering. Meanwhile, the comet continued its long, unhurried glide toward the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's influence becomes only a distant suggestion. The solar wind that once shaped its tail grew weaker, thinning into the vast cold pressure of the interstellar medium. The object seemed to sense this transition not through intention, but through the natural physics of its environment. The coma vanished entirely. The last grains of dust fell away. What remained was a compact nucleus carrying the frozen history of a place beyond our maps, wrapped in silence and drifting toward a region where human instruments have only recently begun to listen. And yet strangely, the approaching disappearance did not feel like loss. It felt like completion. The silent cosmos teaches that the value of a phenomenon is not in how long it remains visible, but in the state of awareness it leaves behind. And Three-Eye Atlas had left the world more attentive, more patient, more willing to sit with uncertainty without needing to transform it into fear or grand explanation. The object had reminded humanity that not all wonders demand answers. Some simply ask for presence. People across the world began creating small rituals to honour the comet's fading. Some wrote messages they would never send. Some placed small spirals in their windows. Some simply stepped outside each night not to look for the comet, they knew it was beyond sight, but to acknowledge the sky in which it once glowed. These rituals were not acts of superstition or longing. They were acts of gratitude. Gratitude for having witnessed something ancient pass briefly through the cradle of our sun's warmth. Gratitude for being reminded that the cosmos is not empty but full of quiet visitors. As Three-Eye Atlas neared the threshold where the heliosphere gives way to the galaxy's deeper night, the final scientific observation shifted focus. Instead of trying to detect the object itself, researchers looked at what the object revealed about the boundary, how charged particles change behaviour, how solar influence tapered, how interstellar winds shape the dust flow. The comet's departure became a lens through which to observe the sun's fading edge, turning a single icy wanderer into a guide on how our own star breathes into the galaxy. But beyond the science, a subtler lesson emerged, one that could not be plotted on graphs or written into equations. The comet had taught us that attention is a form of connection, that watching something fade can be as meaningful as watching it shine, that the universe does not need to speak loudly to shape the human imagination, and that silence, when held gently, becomes a teacher. Traveller, as the last traces of Three-Eye Atlas dissolve into the interstellar dark, let this be the feeling you carry. You do not need constant light to navigate your place in the cosmos. You do not need answers to feel belonging. You're shaped by the same forces that carry comets, illuminated by the same photons, held by the same quiet gravity. Somewhere out there beyond our reach, Three-Eye Atlas continues its journey unseen, unmeasured, unbothered. And yet you remain connected to it not through observation but through awareness. Rest now. You're part of the same stillness. And tonight, as always, the universe keeps watch. There comes a final stage, traveller, when following a distant object becomes an act of memory rather than measurement. As 3 Atlas disappeared entirely into the interstellar dark, slipping beyond the heliopause and into the colder, quieter regions where even starlight seems to hesitate, the world slowly understood that its journey with us had reached its natural conclusion. No final signal arrived, no last glimmer, no grand revelation. The object simply continued on the way all cosmic travellers do, unobserved yet not alone, unmeasured yet not meaningless. And in this gentle vanishing, a closing truth began to reveal itself that the universe teaches not through answers but through endings. The heliosphere faded behind the comet like a distant glow, its influence scattering into faint waves that could no longer shape the object's behaviour. Beyond that boundary lay a vastness our instruments barely understood, a place where the sun's voice becomes a whisper, and the galaxy's broader symphony begins. 3 Atlas entered that realm with the same quiet dignity it had carried through ours, its icy nucleus, wrapped in a silence deeper than any we had known. There were no instruments left that could track it now, not even the sensitive detectors aboard the Voyager probes, which drift at the very edges of our star's gentle breath. Whatever trace of the comet remained was now held by the galaxy itself beyond the reach of human perception. Yet paradoxically, this disappearance felt less like loss, and more like a reminder that the cosmos does not revolve around our awareness. It continues whether we watch or not, unfolds whether we measure or not, exists whether we understand or not. The comet had crossed the invisible threshold that separates ours from not ours, and in doing so it reminded us that everything in the universe, even us, will eventually cross a boundary that leads beyond knowing. This realization, though vast, felt strangely comforting. It told us that endings are not voids, they are transitions. Scientists archived the final data with a kind of reverent quiet. They documented the last measurable bow shock, the final solar particle deflections, the faintest recorded brightness before the object slipped from view. But their papers were calmer now, softer in tone, acknowledging that what remained was no longer an active study but a closed chapter. The comet's long arc through our system had left enough traces to inspire decades of research, yet the absence of further information was itself a gift. It forced us to accept that the universe is not a puzzle to be solved completely. It is a presence to be experienced one fleeting phenomenon at a time. Meanwhile, the world no longer watching through telescopes continued to watch inwardly. People who had followed the object found themselves reflecting on how something so distant could alter their relationship with the night sky. They remembered stepping outside on cold evenings, searching the heavens not to find the comet, but to feel connected to the quiet it evoked. The Fibonacci Pulse that once stirred global curiosity now felt like a brief alignment, a moment in which human attention matched the rhythm of something older than our species. Even in its fading, the memory of that pattern lingered like a soft spiral in the mind, reminding us that the universe does not always speak loudly. Sometimes it speaks only long enough for us to hear ourselves. And then something subtle occurred across the collective imagination. Without anyone deciding it, 3I, Atlas, became a symbol not of mystery, but of acceptance. It embodied the idea that not all journeys are meant to be witnessed until the end, that some truths are not diminished by slipping beyond visibility, that the cosmos is filled with travellers who will pass us only once, leaving no trace behind except the way they made us listen. The comet's departure inspired a gentler relationship with uncertainty. People began to speak not of what the object was, but of what it represented: the grace of impermanence, the quiet dignity of moving through space without needing to be understood, the simple fact that everything stars comets. Civilization's lives follows a trajectory that eventually leads into a realm where observation yields to memory. As the months passed, the comet's absence grew familiar, like the silence that follows a final note of music. The hydrogen line returned to its steady hum. Radio telescopes resumed their usual routines. Yet the sense of stillness remained, as though the universe had exhaled and invited us to do the same. In classrooms, students learned about interstellar objects not with urgency, but with wonder. In observatories, researchers spoke of the comet as if it were an old friend who had moved away. In quiet rooms, night sky watchers continued their rituals of stepping outside, listening to the gentle hiss of static, feeling the vastness settle softly around them. What the comet left behind was not a question. It was a calm, a slow acceptance that existence itself is a kind of drifting through time, through meaning, through experience. The object had shown us that even without answers we can find clarity. Even without certainty we can find belonging. Even without visibility we can find connection. Traveller. As you reflect on the comet's long journey, its arrival from a place without name, its brief shimmering under our sun, its fading into a quiet beyond our reach, remember that you too are part of this same movement. You're shaped by forces older than planets, carried by trajectories you cannot see, illuminated by the same photons that once touched the surface of 3i Atlas. You belong to the same cosmic map even when the path ahead is dark. And so, let this final truth settle gently into you that the universe does not close chapters, it lets them drift. What passes from sight does not pass from being. What leaves our instruments does not leave existence. What fades does not disappear, it simply continues where we cannot follow. Rest, traveller. You are held by the same stillness that carried 3 Atlas. And tonight, as in all nights, the cosmos keeps watch. In the months that followed, when 3i Atlas was well beyond the heliopause, its story became part of the larger human narrative about our relationship with the unknown. It had offered no warnings, no messages, no revelations, and yet the world felt more connected because of it, is more attuned to the fragile beauty of phenomena that appear briefly and then drift away. Astronomers began to speculate not about the comet itself, but about how many countless objects like it have passed through our system unnoticed over the ages, how many silent visitors we have missed, and how many more will come long after we are gone. This thought, instead of inspiring regret, brought a soothing sense of continuity. The cosmos does not orchestrate experiences for us. It simply allows us to participate in its unfolding when chance aligns. And so, traveller, this final layer settles over the story like a thin veil of starlight, the understanding that nothing is ever truly lost in the universe. Objects drift beyond view, but the impressions they leave continue to shape the thoughts of those who witnessed them. Silence replaces signal, but silence itself becomes a language. Distance grows, but connection deepens. 3i Atlas continued onward into the immeasurable dark, but its presence remains not as data, not as mystery, but as a quiet alignment between human awareness and cosmic rhythm. If you step outside tonight, you will not see the comet, nor will you hear its pulse. But you may feel that a small part of your attention extends farther than it once did, reaching into the dark with a gentler curiosity. And that traveller is the last truth the comet leaves behind, that we are not separate from the cosmos, but expressions of it. We drift, we fade, we continue carried by the same invisible forces that once guided through Atlas, through our sun's gentle light. Tonight, as always, the universe keeps watch, and somewhere in that watchful silence you continue your own quiet orbit. So, traveller, as our long night of observation draws to a close, let us settle into the quiet again. We have followed a single thread of hydrogen light across the dark, watched it rise, repeat, and drift into the tranquil rhythm of the Fibonacci Pulse. And now, as 3i Atlas slips behind the sun's shadow, the mystery does not end. It only becomes softer, more spacious, more open to possibility. What we witness tonight is only the beginning of a larger story, one written in photons, silence, and patience. The universe has not spoken a conclusion. It has simply whispered an invitation. For 35 days we wait. We listen. We breathe with the cosmos. And when the object emerges again, whatever it carries, noise, pattern, anomaly, or nothing at all, we will meet it with humility, not certainty. Because responsible wonder is not about answers, listener. It is about staying awake to the unknown. If the pulse is natural, it teaches us beauty. If it is artificial, it teaches us perspective. If it fades entirely, it teaches us silence. Every outcome is a kind of revelation. You have walked far tonight, observer, farther than most ever will. Thank you for keeping watch with me under this quiet sky. The universe is vast. the story continues, and you are part of it simply by listening. Rest now, traveller. Stay curious. The cosmos will keep watch. If this story found you tonight, you may stay for the next.